It all started unexpectedly when a strange woman approached a college student petting cats. And he was left stunned wondering why such a beautiful person would talk to a friendless loner like him, while being even more shocked that she knew about his secret daily cat petting spot. As he asked if she was also there for the cats, but she simply handed him a ticket called a special offer, which he saw was an Ice Guy reincarnation ticket. And the mysterious woman just said she would see him soon before disappearing. Then suddenly he was falling through a dark empty void, completely bewildered, as his senses faded and he began to hear the sound of a baby crying, only to realize with a jolt that the crying was his own as someone called out to Prince Rufus. And he understood he had been reborn in another world. A fantasy world called Moonguard, where he was now Rufus Elidoria, the third prince, which was the so-called special offer. So as he grew, he pretended to be a normal baby to hide his adult consciousness from the maids. And he grew up strong until his 7th birthday, when he would participate in the skill inheritance ceremony, when his big brothers approached and asked if he was nervous for the big event, introducing themselves as Gilliam the first prince and Leonard the second prince of Elidoria, who reassured him that they were just as nervous when it was their turn. Then they walked him towards the ceremony hall as he shuffled along shyly, and he reached for the glowing crystal on the altar, feeling like he was at a school open house with his father the king watching intently, as a priest officially called Prince Rufus Elidoria forward to place his hand on the crystal. He then touched the orb, his face filled with awe and anticipation, and the priest announced that Rufus had awakened the summoning skill, leaving Rufus to wonder why everyone reacted so strongly to what he thought was just summoning magic, as he imagined summoning terrifying creatures and huge monsters. But then he doubted his ability to control such a powerful beast even if he could summon one, deciding he would much rather be a tamer surrounded by fluffy creatures anyway. Just as his brother approached telling him he had acquired a very rare skill. So Rufus asked what the summoning skill actually was, and was told to visit the Summoners Guild for more details, since very few people in the country have that skill. In fact, his brother believed there were only 2 members in the entire summoning guild, where upon arrival they were immediately greeted by a man named Balt, who introduced them to Selbus Tion, the head of the guild, and a little girl named Lala, making Rufus realize there truly were only 2 of them. And getting straight to business, he asked Selbus to explain the skill, who then led him to the guild's library, which was a very small room with only a couple of bookshelves, causing Rufus to think that calling it a library was quite an exaggeration. Then Selbus handed him a book that looked like an encyclopedia, and explained that what he could summon was neither an animal nor a monster, as he imagined summoning a giant fluffy beast with a gem on its forehead that towered over him. And the vision was so intense that Balt had to catch him as he nearly collapsed. Then Rufus looked at his shaking hands, realizing he was drained and summoning multiple times would be difficult, while Lala was completely frozen in shock on the floor, which was an understandable reaction. So Rufus just stood there a bit stunned himself, and the massive creature spoke, complaining that the room was too cramped and asked to break down a wall, which made Rufus exclaim in shock that the creature could talk. So he nervously asked if it could get a bit smaller, but the creature called it an unreasonable request. Then it agreed, but only on the condition that Rufus give it a name, which surprised him, as the creature explained that with a name it would become exclusively his and could freely change its size on command. Realizing this meant he could keep it like a pet, he excitedly named the creature Ragios, who happily accepted the name, while a little bird named Peep also appeared. And Rufus immediately asked Ragios if it could shrink down to the same size as Peep, a thought that filled him with so much joy his eyes sparkled and he started drooling. Then he watched in absolute delight as Ragios transformed into an adorable puppy-sized ball of fluff. While Ragios apologized for this being its size limit, Rufus was too busy melting in a sea of fluffy bliss to care. And when Ragios felt it had failed and should disappear, Rufus quickly told it to wait, reassuring his new companion that the puppy size was absolutely perfect. Then he lovingly scooped up the fluffy Ragios, who told him he never needed to ask for permission to do so, causing Rufus to feel like he was ascending to heaven from pure bliss, while Selbus looked on with grave concern, as Selbus declared that they must immediately report this unrecorded magical creature that speaks human language to the king. So they rushed back to the palace, looking utterly bewildered by the sudden turn of events, where Rufus burst into the throne room announcing an emergency to his father, and the king looked down from his throne demanding to know what was happening. Then Rufus proudly presented his new friend, introducing Ragios, a Di's white feathered dragon, while the king stared in disbelief as Rufus also introduced Peep, a burden perched on his shoulder. And when Rufus prompted them to say hello to his father, Ragios transformed back to its giant size and threatened to show no mercy if the king harmed his master, leaving the king terrified. So the overwhelmed king demanded Rufus explain everything from the very beginning, as he tried to process the fact that his son had summoned magical creatures that were completely unknown. And when the king asked how he summoned a dragon, Rufus explained that he just imagined it, which baffled the king even more. Then Ragios let out another roar, making the king scream in terror again, leaving Rufus standing alone in the throne room after the chaotic meeting had ended. And the king, looking utterly defeated, appointed Rufus as the new guild master while Ragios playfully bit his head. A decision that shocked Rufus, but Selbus explained he had already agreed to become the vice guild master. As the king elaborated that since Ragios is such a precious and unknown being, Rufus's new duty is to research it. And from now on he must continue to responsibly report on any magical creatures he summons. So the still-shaken king pleaded with Rufus to tell Lord Ragios that he means no harm, which left Rufus reflecting on how serious things had become, though he was thrilled to have permission to keep his new friends, especially since the custom of keeping pets didn't even exist in this world, which meant he could now legally create the fluffy paradise of his dreams, a thought that nearly made him faint with joy until his mother appeared, who asked if he was done with his report to the king. Then she looked down and curiously asked what the little creatures in his arms were. So Rufus happily introduced Ragios the red ice white feather dragon and Peep the burden. But his mother just stared in shock, barely able to say the word dragon, before she suddenly fainted right in front of him, leaving Rufus to guess that the shock of seeing magical creatures for the first time was too much for her. Then as he stood by her bedside, someone called out his name, and his two older brothers Gilliam and Leonard rushed in, explaining the king told them about the incredible magical creatures. So Gilliam the scholar got incredibly excited and asked if he could touch them. And while he gently pet Ragios, who looked annoyed, Leonard cautiously asked if they were safe. Rufus then had to ask his brother to stop, as Ragios was clearly getting irritated by all the petting. But Gilliam was completely fascinated and insisted Rufus tell him everything later. And after an exhausting day, Rufus wished his sleeping companions good night. Then as he drifted off to sleep, a mysterious figure appeared in his room, and he suddenly woke up, rubbing his eyes in a strange white void, where he found himself standing before the mysterious woman from the day he was reincarnated, who revealed herself to be Moonguard, the creator god of this world. She then explained that she was the one who brought his dying soul from Earth to her world, and when he asked why, she told him that from now on, his mission was to massively boost the recognition of the summoning skill, leaving Rufus utterly confused by her strange request, as the creator god declared that they would now seriously boost the popularity of the summoning skill, leaving Rufus to wonder what she meant by seriously boost. And when she asked if he would accept the task, he panicked, demanding a proper explanation. So the slightly annoyed god sighed and agreed to explain after a cute flower creature popped up. Then the scene suddenly shifted to a classroom where a teacher version of the gods stood before a whiteboard, leaving Rufus completely shocked by the bizarre change. As the teacher god began her lesson, explaining that the summoning skill is incredibly important to Moonguard, she drew a diagram showing that used mana in their world disappears forever, and the summoning skill is the only way to replenish it. Then a doodle of a cat demonstrated that summoned creatures act as conduits to bring new mana into the world, leaving Rufus to stare in utter confusion at the strange and childish presentation. And the teacher god continued, explaining that because the skill is so rare, almost no one knows its true world-saving purpose. Then she hit the whiteboard with a pointer, confirming he was following along, as she revealed that he inherited the skill because of his intense love for animals, since people are granted skills based on their deepest desires. And she chose him from Earth specifically because she heard Earthlings have incredible imaginations. Then she casually added that inheriting a skill also grants the ability to use magic, which made Rufus gasp in shock. And he became incredibly excited about the prospect of using attack, healing, and daily life magic. But the teacher god quickly brought him back to the main topic. So he asked why she couldn't just send mana to the world herself, since she's a god. And she illustrated that doing so would cause catastrophic disasters that would completely destroy Moonguard. Because while she loves her world and its people, if the mana ever dries up, it will become uninhabitable. Which is why she needs his powerful imagination and love for animals to spread the skill and use it as much as possible. So Rufus enthusiastically accepted the mission, promising he was the man for the job. And the creator god gave a gentle smile, as she told him she was glad she chose him and was counting on him to succeed. Then as she vanished he wondered why the whole scene felt so strangely familiar. And he suddenly found himself falling through the void again before waking up with a jolt in his own bed, where he sat up looking exhausted and confused by the strange dream. But as he wondered if it was real, Ragios spoke from beside him, confirming it was not a dream, and delivered a message from the Creator God to not forget his promise. Then Rufus realized Peep was gone, and Ragios explained the little bird had already returned, and that since Ragios was ordered to be his body, Rufus could simply summon Peep back anytime. So he did just that, and Peep appeared with a cheerful greeting, happy to be back. Then Rufus announced that his plan for the day was to introduce his new friends to everyone. As the scene shifted to the castle's training grounds where knights were sparring, and Rufus arrived with his companions wanting to show them off to all the knights. While the knights murmured about how cute Rufus was and Ragios worried it was the wrong kind of attention. Then his brother Leonard arrived, patting his head and praising him for his hard work, while reminiscing about how even their scholarly brother Gilliam had to train hard to become a skilled fighter. And right on cue, Gilliam appeared wanting to hear the fun story Leonard was telling. So Rufus took the opportunity to ask Gilliam if inheriting a skill really means you can use magic, explaining that he wanted to find out what kind of magic he was capable of using. So Gilliam suggested they use the spacious training grounds to test it out since he hadn't learned about it at the guild, and decided they should start with a simple, light spell, explaining that it's a basic spell perfect for practice since anyone can use it. Then Rufus eagerly held out his hand and shouted the spell's name. But absolutely nothing happened. So he tried again, completely confused, while Gilliam also wondered why it wasn't working. And after Gilliam advised him to focus his mana, he tried one last time. But when that failed too, he begged his brother to teach him other spells, which Gilliam refused, leaving Rufus completely dejected after every single spell failed, wondering if his magic career was already over. So he rushed back to the Summoners Guild to see Selbus and Lala, where he told them he had an urgent question for them, and asked what kind of magic he could use with his summoning skill. But Selbus and Lala just looked at each other grimly. Then Selbus broke the news that the summoning skill doesn't allow its user to cast any magic spells at all. And back at the palace, a heartbroken Rufus moped while Gilliam tried to cheer him up. But then he suddenly burst into maniacal laughter with a new idea that terrified Selbus and Lala, as he declared that if he can't use magic himself, he'll just have his summoned creatures use it for him, realizing that to create fire he just needed to summon a creature that could breathe fire. Then he remembered the perfect creature from the encyclopedia, and confidently shouted, "Summon, salamander," as a cloud of smoke billowed out before him, and a small, adorable lizard-like creature with a flame on its head appeared, asking if he had been called, which made Rufus completely lose it as he was overwhelmed by a whole new level of cuteness. Then Lala nervously asked if the creature was hot, but the salamander explained it wasn't in attack mode. So Rufus asked it to try burning a piece of paper he held out in a bowl, and the tiny creature unleashed an incredibly powerful blast of fire that amazed him, making him praise the amazing salamander for its power, as he realized with glee that this was the magic of the summoning skill and he could use magic through his summons, which left Selbus completely impressed by the new guild master's ingenuity. And he admitted that he had never considered the true possibilities of the skill before. So Rufus told them both to raise their heads and join him in showing the world how useful the summoning skill truly is. Then he officially named the salamander Kien, who happily accepted its new name. And since he still had plenty of power left, he decided to test Kien's fire strength even more, jokingly suggesting they should burn down the castle just for fun. But unfortunately his parents walked in at that exact moment, and his mother stared in horror, demanding to know what he just said as Rufus began to panic, as his mother sternly demanded to know the meaning of his actions. And he panicked, thinking the training ground had suddenly become a battlefield with her arrival. Then she looked down at the new creature and asked who this child was. So he nervously introduced Kian the salamander, which made his mother's eyes widen in shock. And she gasped, "A lizard," before fainting yet again as Rufus cried out her name. Then Leonard helped the queen up, who explained it was just too much stimulation, while the king told a worried Rufus it was okay. But after recovering, she apologized and asked Rufus to properly introduce her to his children, explaining that she'd been curious about them since they couldn't talk properly the day before. So Rufus told his summons to introduce themselves, and Kian, Peep, and Ragios all proudly stated their names, which amazed his mother, who then asked if she could touch them, and Ragios reluctantly agreed to endure it just for her. So she gently pet Ragios's head, marveling at how fluffy he was. And then she held Kian, telling him he had a cute face and apologizing for being startled earlier, before smiling warmly and asking them all to please take care of her son, leaving Rufus stunned and touched that she really just came to say hello. But back at the guild, Lala was completely terrified of Kian, and Rufus wondered if she had a fear of salamanders. He then thought about how convenient it would be for her to have a fire-type creature for herself. So while Lala was busy studying with Peep's help, he wondered if a bird-type creature might be a better fit for her. And placing his hand on the book, he began a new summoning for a firebird, which manifested as an impossibly round and adorable bird that let out a tiny chirp, making Rufus clutch his chest as he was completely overwhelmed by its cuteness. As he thought about how its charm was totally different from Peep's but still so incredibly cute. And when the new bird puffed out a tiny flame, he declared that fluffy creatures are truly geniuses as Lala watched with wide eyes. Then he presented the new summon to her, asking what she thought of this one, introducing the little creature as Okan, a firebird. And Lala was immediately smitten, blushing as she looked at the cute bird, as she gently held Okan in her hands, thinking she might be able to summon one just like it herself. Meanwhile, Rufus found Selbus in the library, who was busy with a new project. And Selbus explained that with so many new creatures appearing, he thought they would need an illustrated guide for their reports, which Rufus thought was a great idea until he saw Selbus's very simplistic drawing. So he turned to Balt and asked if he was any good at drawing. But Balt firmly stated that he couldn't draw at all. Then Rufus glanced at Lala, who was happily drawing, and with a sinister grin decided he would have to do it himself. However, his own attempt was a childish doodle that made Kian exclaim how terrible it was. And when Selbus suggested hiring a court painter, Rufus found the idea frustrating and suddenly had a better idea, as he shouted, "Manifest, Art Bear!" And a cloud of smoke filled the room, which slowly cleared to reveal a large round shadow. And a giant fluffy white bear appeared, which Rufus immediately hugged, exclaiming how soft it was. He then named the new creature Beard and told it to get ready, as he wanted to see its power in action. So he asked Beard to draw Ragios, and the bear immediately started scribbling on a notepad. Then it revealed a masterpiece, a stunningly realistic portrait of Ragios that left Rufus and Selbus speechless at its incredible speed and quality. And when Lala asked if it could draw in other styles, it quickly sketched a beautiful shoujo manga-style portrait of her, just as the king and his attendants arrived, having heard about the new summons. And the king looked completely overwhelmed, remarking on how the numbers had grown quite a bit. So Rufus tried to get his companions to greet his father, but the king yelled for them to stay right where they were, telling Rufus to just keep quiet for a while and admitting that he doesn't really dislike them that much, which left Rufus with some unexpected free time, so he decided to give everyone a tour of the castle, though he worried that such a strange group walking together would stand out too much. But he was tired of just sitting around in his room doing nothing, and he suddenly remembered his brother Leonard telling him about exploring the castle's basement, which sparked a fierce internal debate among different versions of himself, as his cautious side argued against it while his adventurous sides dreamed of treasure and new discoveries. And his adventurous self ultimately won, questioning if he really wanted to live an unadventurous life after being reincarnated. So after a painful mental battle, the conclusion was reached, and he announced to his companions that they were going to the basement. He then explained that it was located in a section only royalty could enter behind an old-fashioned black door, which they soon found a large ornate door covered in vines at the end of a long hallway. And he hummed with excitement, wondering what kind of adventure was waiting for them inside. But as the door creaked open, it revealed a terrifying headless horseman, making Rufus realize things had just gotten extremely serious, as the king's voice echoed in his mind, telling him to stay quiet for a while. Rufus looked at the headless knight and realized they were in big trouble now, because they definitely couldn't stay quiet. Then he remembered back a few hours ago when he first entered the dark and musty basement with Ragios. And while Ragios warned him to watch his step, Rufus was confident the dark wouldn't be a problem, because he had Kian's fire to light the way, as the little salamander's flame lit up a candlestick like magic, illuminating the long stone corridor ahead of them. Then, after walking for what felt like forever, Rufus noted that there was nothing there, even though his brother Leonard had seemed so serious about the place. When suddenly he heard a click and turned to see a large metal gate had slammed shut behind them, trapping them inside as Ragios cried out his name. And before he could react, something charged at him from the darkness, as the terrifying Dullahan on its spectral horse galloped towards him, letting out a bone-chilling cry. and he was thrown backward by the sheer force of its presence. He then stared in shock at the headless armor, realizing a Dullahan was guarding the basement, which made a twisted kind of sense for a secret royal passage. So he figured that since there was another door up ahead, this must be some kind of defense mechanism that had been activated. But that didn't stop him from wanting to run home as the Dullahan's horse reared up with a terrifying neigh. Then it charged forward again at full speed. And just as it was about to strike, Rufus was knocked to the floor. But the blow never landed because his brother Leonard appeared out of nowhere, blocking the attack and asking what kind of fun he was having. Then Gilliam appeared as well, scolding him for not inviting his brothers along for the adventure. And Rufus was overjoyed to see them as Gilliam checked if he was okay. His brothers then explained that the basement was full of traps and he couldn't get out easily now that the defense system was active. And Leonard warned him with a grin that they would all be in big trouble if their father found out about their little excursion. Then he turned to face the Dullahan and greeted it like an old friend before preparing to fight, which surprised Rufus, who learned that Leonard had fought this very same creature when he was just a child. And while it gave him a lot of trouble back then, he was much stronger now. So he dashed forward in a blur of motion, his sword moving too fast for the eye to see, leaving Rufus completely stunned that he couldn't even follow the attack, as Leonard laughed at how much weaker the Dullahan seemed now. And after the creature was defeated, a new door creaked open as his brothers marveled at the power of the sword saint's skill. But their adventure wasn't over yet, as a group of gargoyles appeared and Gilliam stepped forward, eager for his own chance to show off to his little brother. And with a single powerful blast of magic, the gargoyle was instantly roasted to a crisp, leaving Gilliam a bit disappointed. Then, as his brothers congratulated each other, Rufus felt a pang of sadness, realizing he was always being protected because his own power couldn't even begin to compare to theirs, as they headed towards the final room, where he followed behind them, feeling small and useless. And he was horrified to see that this time they had to face both the Dullahan and the gargoyles at once. But his brothers just patted him on the head, telling him that there are times a man must fight and encouraging him to take the lead. So he protested that he couldn't use swords or magic, but they just reassured him it was okay because he was their little brother, which Ragios found unreasonable. Then Ragios stepped forward, declaring that his summons could fight just as well as his brothers, and asked for his command. And with renewed confidence, Rufus cleared his throat and prepared to give his orders, as he pointed dramatically and shouted for Ragios to go, who confidently replied, "As you wish." Then Ragios simply poked the stone floor with its paw, and the mighty Dullahan immediately disintegrated into a cloud of black dust, leaving Rufus and his brothers completely speechless. But as more monsters appeared, Rufus commanded Beard and Kian to join the fray because that wasn't even a proper warm-up for Ragios. And his brothers watched in utter amazement as his summons unleashed a devastating coordinated attack that easily wiped out the remaining monsters. Then Beard proudly announced that the battle was finished, and Rufus congratulated his team on a job well done, leaving Leonard to mutter in disbelief that he didn't even do that much damage when he was down here. And as the victorious group stood before the final gate, it slowly rumbled open, revealing a brightly lit room that made Rufus squint his eyes, which turned out to be a large empty open space, except for a single stone pedestal standing in the very center. Then Rufus noticed Gilliam was bleeding from the fight, but his brother brushed it off, saying it would heal quickly, and pointed out that his blood had dripped onto the pedestal, activating a hidden mechanism. And as the pedestal glowed, a section of the wall rumbled and slid open, revealing a secret passage, which was a fascinating sight to behold, as Gilliam explained that the mechanism only reacts to royal blood, which is why only the royal family could enter this area, and told Rufus that he would have to go inside to see what was hidden there. So he stepped through the opening and found himself in a massive vault filled with mountains of gold and treasure. And he stared in awe, realizing that the legends of a hidden treasure vault were actually true. But his brothers explained that the basement was built to be a sturdy emergency shelter, and this vault was actually used to store emergency supplies, which all family members learn about eventually. Then, as Rufus wondered if they were told this secret when they inherited their skills, Ragios suddenly grew alert, sensing a strong companion on the other side of the far wall. And Rufus wondered if it could be another powerful magical creature. So his brothers knocked on the wall and confirmed there was a space beyond it, but even Leonard's strength couldn't break through. But when Rufus placed his hand on the wall, it began to glow and phase away as if inviting him in. Then a deep voice boomed from within, asking who dared to disturb its slumber, which made Rufus jump back in fright, as the wall transformed into a large stone sarcophagus, which then crumbled away, revealing a tiny box-like creature that left Rufus completely bewildered. as Rufus gulped nervously at the booming voice asking who dared to disturb its slumber. He then cautiously approached the strange box-like creature that had appeared from the wall. And suddenly his brothers burst out laughing, which left him completely confused. As the little box chirped, "Just kidding," and Leonard admitted he'd always wanted to try a dramatic entrance like that. But then his brothers got suspicious, calling it a talking trap box, and threatened to dismantle it, which made the box panic and insist it wasn't a bad trap box. So Rufus gently asked if it had been here all alone this whole time, and the box confirmed it had, explaining that it had been waiting for a new master this whole time, which surprised Rufus, as it formally asked if he would become its new master, which left him speechless. He then clarified that it meant contractor, and the box confirmed that's what it meant. So he asked how one becomes its master, and it explained that whoever gives it a name becomes its master, which made his brothers immediately start shouting random names. Then Rufus turned to Ragios and asked if it was possible to make another person's summoned creature your own. And Ragios explained that it's only possible if the original summoner is no longer in this world, which made Rufus look at the little box with a sad expression, realizing it had probably been alone down here for a very long time after its master had passed away. So after his brothers ran out of name ideas, he asked if he could be the one to name it, and the box eagerly agreed, telling him to please do so. He then asked if it had really been waiting for someone to come this entire time, and the box confirmed it had, explaining that it was so bored it had spent its time thinking up the perfect greeting for the next person it met, which is what led to the dramatic entrance earlier. So since it was a trap box, Rufus started suggesting names like Toragoro and Torasuk, which the box found problematic in various ways. Then he finally settled on the name Torachan, and asked the little box how it liked that name, which made the box start glowing brightly with happiness, as everyone watched in amazement. And with a flash of light, the box announced that the master re-registration was complete. Then it declared that from now on it was his loyal servant, which made Rufus blush and stammer, as his brothers teased him about why he named it that. But he insisted that magical creatures are friends and Torachan is a friend too, which seemed to make the little box very happy. And as it wiggled with joy, Rufus marveled at the endless possibilities of his summoning skill, realizing he could even summon non-animal creatures like robots. Then as they left the vault, Leonard remarked that he never knew a hidden room like this existed, and Gilliam wondered if Torachan had some kind of secret. So Gilliam asked what was inside the box, and it replied that there were lots of things inside. And after Leonard gave it the cold shoulder since he wasn't its master, Rufus happily asked Torachan to show them what was inside. Then the box opened its lid and pulled out a terrifying spiked mace and a baseball bat covered in nails, followed by a slipper and a variety of other strange objects, leaving Rufus and his brothers completely shocked by the bizarre contents. And as the box continued to pull out strange weapons from its seemingly endless four-dimensional space, Leonard wondered if they were even weapons at all, since he'd never seen anything like them before, which made Torachan proudly declare that it had better stuff than their treasure vault and they could praise it more. Then Rufus picked up a strange-looking handle that seemed familiar somehow, and a beam of light shot out from it, creating a lightsaber. He then explained to his confused brothers that it was a weapon from a galaxy far, far away a long time ago, but quickly put it away, realizing he almost broke the world building, and suggested they look at more normal weapons instead. So he picked up a massive greatsword and struggled to lift the huge old-fashioned weapon. Then he declared that he wanted to try swinging it, but his brothers told him to wait, as he struggled to even hold the heavy sword upright. And with a mighty yell, he swung it with all his might, creating a powerful shockwave that completely shattered the stone wall behind him, leaving him and his brothers staring in stunned silence, as the dust settled, revealing the massive hole he had created. And he looked down at his hands in disbelief, wondering what had just happened. But his brothers were more worried about the castle wall he had just destroyed. Then Leonard, who had never seen anything like this before, asked if Rufus knew what the sword was. And with a shocked expression, Rufus realized he was holding the legendary holy sword Excalibur, leaving him to wonder if he had really just picked up a holy sword from a talking treasure chest in the basement. As his brothers marveled at the unmistakable radiance of the holy sword Excalibur, and Leonard was so overcome with emotion that he started nuzzling the sword, which made Rufus wonder if he looked that silly when he fawned over his summons. Then Leonard suddenly asked if he could have the sword, and Gilliam immediately told him to back off. But Rufus agreed, saying it would be wasted on him anyway, and his brother hugged him in gratitude. So Gilliam had to pull a pouting Leonard away from his little brother as they decided to leave the now wrecked basement. And as they walked out, Rufus breathed a sigh of relief, But Leonard suggested they keep the treasure vault a secret for now, and Rufus wondered what he was plotting. Then their father suddenly appeared looking furious, which made all three brothers jump in shock, as he revealed that he knew everything because he felt the tremor from Rufus swinging the sword. And before anyone could explain, Leonard proudly showed their father the legendary sword, excitedly pointing out the incredible radiance of the holy sword Excalibur, which made both Rufus and Gilliam facepalm at their brother's complete lack of awareness, as their father looked on with a bemused expression. Then with a sinister smile he summoned them all to his office to hear the full story, where they were thoroughly lectured for their little adventure. And Rufus explained that Torachan was a trap box that an ancestor with the summoning skill had summoned long ago. So the king asked if Lord Torachan could produce other legendary weapons as well. And Rufus decided to test that theory, asking Torachan for the magic sword Durandal, which it immediately produced. Then he asked for the holy spear Gungnir, which it also had. And finally the magic spear Longinus, which to his amazement it also possessed, making Rufus giggle with glee at the realization that Torachan really did have everything, while Gilliam told him to not just say, "So he says." And the king used his appraisal skill to confirm that the sword was indeed the real Excalibur. Then he reminded them all that entering the basement without permission was strictly forbidden. But since what's done is done, he decided an appropriate punishment was in order. So he assigned Gilliam and Leonard the monumental task of creating a complete weapon catalogue of Torachan's entire arsenal, which made Gilliam groan in despair. And Rufus's job was to use that catalogue to check if Torachan had the corresponding weapons. Then the king ordered Leonard to return Excalibur to Torachan, which made him cry out in disappointment. And the next day, Rufus and his companions arrived at the salon his father had designated for their work, feeling guilty that his brothers had gotten roped into his punishment as well, when he suddenly heard his brother Leonard sobbing from inside the room. And he peeked in to see him completely passed out on a massive pile of paperwork, as Leonard muttered in his sleep that he was a strong man and would never give up on the endless desk work, which made Rufus feel incredibly guilty for getting him into this mess. Then he heard Gilliam crying out that he had wanted to do all of it himself, which left Rufus completely speechless at his brother's strange priorities, as he witnessed a scene of pure chaos with Gilliam trying to pry Excalibur from Leonard's hands while Leonard was still asleep and Torachan just sat there looking bored. And he realized that their father had cleverly arranged the punishment so that the studious Gilliam would see it as a reward, while the adventure-loving Leonard would be tormented by not being allowed to participate.